So in this order, so here.
Yeah. Hi, how are you doing? Oh, good. Very well. How are you? Hi, how are you doing? Sana. Very nice meeting you. Thank you for introducing me. Fantastic work. Actually, I have to say, my colleague is going to be filling in for me right now. I don't blame you. I think at this point, my stay away is really good. Yeah. So yeah, I think you guys need that as your goal. The other one never said you will do it. So we're really so get the group in that.
You want to step down here first?
Yes, please. And then, so I will can have the podium, and then we'll ask our guests to come up and ask some questions. So otherwise, Ali and then it'd be easier if I use a handheld mic from the lectern.
It would just be if you expect any Q&A at the end.
Yes,
Yes,
we'll try
just
it.
use that one.
And which mic do you use when Oh, perfect. Perfect.
What we do is I'll do a kind of thumbs up.
Of course. Perfect. That's lovely. Thanks so much, Pippa. Thank you.
So it'll match the slide. Okay, thank you guys.
Is
I'm a real lounge judge, former rugby commentator.
She's like, yes.
Yeah.
You want us to make her start?
If you don't mind sitting at the front, just to start.
Alright, Sarah, if you want to just brief.
Okay. Hello. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Ah, there we go. So, ladies and gents, if we could just bring this meeting to order, that would be fantastic. Great, thank you very much. And a very warm welcome. Good afternoon. I can just say that to our audience here in Dubai and to our international audience online. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you. My name is Sarah Muckerjee. I'm Chief Executive of IEMA, which is the Global Sustainability Professionals Network and Institute. And we're going to talk on this day of urbanisation and transport about connecting people and bringing people together. Absolutely vital if we're going to get where we need to go. The first quotation from the White House Climate Resilient Framework is from President Biden, who says that the US has always come out stronger from any crisis. And I think that's as good a definition of resilience as any, really, that you withstand shocks and you emerge stronger from them. And we're going to have an amazing panel for you to talk a little bit more about this, because of course it's not just one country that's facing this crisis. It requires every sector and every person to get where we need to go. So before I introduce our panelists up to the stage, it's my absolute pleasure, I'm trying not to fangirl too much here, to introduce the White House's climate change advisor, Ali ZAIDI, to give us some opening remarks and frame our discussions. Ali, the floor's yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We, as you noted, have really tried from day one under the President's leadership to have a full conversation about climate change. One that recognizes that a big part of what we do must be to go after the root cause of climate change, which is the emissions that come from burning fossil fuels. But that a full conversation on climate change also demands we attend to the impacts that we've already unlocked and that will continue to get worse until we hit net zero and stabilize our contribution to the atmosphere. Hopefully start to reverse the course that we've been on for so many years. As a White House team, we recently gathered people together from civil society, every sector of the economy, at the first ever Resilience Summit, where we issued a framework which is designed not to just be our effort at answering the questions, but also our effort at posing them. I think the conversation on resilience and adaptation demands that we be honest and level with people, that we don't have it all figured out. That the solutions won't be one size fits all, that we really have to go sector by sector, class of infrastructure by class of infrastructure, and think about how to both identify the solutions and then scale them up. Very recently, I joined the president as we rolled out the National Climate Assessment, and before he went on stage to talk about the reach of the impacts in every community across the country, we were backstage and he was playing around with the data visualization tool that we now have available to everybody, to decision makers and to citizens, to interact with what it looks like to be on different climate trajectories. That, I think, is the first and most important step around any conversation on resilience, is having a interoperable and common language approach to talking about the various vectors of risk and how they impact us. I think the second big element of taking this on is trying to really figure out how we reduce and sort of mitigate that risk on the front end, not just the sort of good response and the building back better, but what can we do to bend the curve in real material terms on the front end? And I think increasingly our community of practice is starting to get rigorous around things like building codes to, in material and measurable ways, reduce risk. For example, we know what bolt and brace does in terms of reducing the likelihood that a roof will fly off during a hurricane. That is a measurable thing. And now that we have, I think, those codes and continue on sort of a flywheel basis to improve upon them, we need to translate that into bankable financial products, ways to get the flows of capital moving in the right direction. That's a conversation with the insurance markets. It's a conversation with underwriters on debt facilities who need to do a better job, I think, of demanding the sort of best-in-class mitigation approaches. There's a much bigger conversation, I think, around resilience, which I don't think we're having as vigorously in the United States or really anywhere in the world. And that's the conversation about who pays for it in a real granular way. I think in the international context, there is the sort of climate finance conversation, right? The sort of conversation that we're seeing from day one at the COP here around loss and damage, the conversation around the Green Climate Fund. But what I mean, perhaps to distinguish from that, is the who pays in the conversation where there are already very clearly defined users and ways of getting recovery or rates of return on capital assets. And I think part of the reason is because there is not an effective pricing and valuation of resilience attributes in these systems. I take the grid as an example where we know definitively in the United States, we know that building expanded transmission capacity returns resilience attributes to the grid. We know that to be true. And yet we have found no way to date to compensate transmission operators for that value on the grid, which means, and Nat Cohane is here so he can do the actual econ analysis on this, but my understanding from economics is when you don't value something, you're unlikely to be investing in it in an optimal way to unlock the maximum net benefits for society. And so we know this to be the case in a multiple, I think, arena, whether it's flood mitigation or fire mitigation or the resilience of systems, the grid, ports, and others that we rely on day in and day out. So I think thing one is identifying the vectors of risk, getting very, very granular about it. And that is what the National Climate Assessment's been about for the U.S. It's what we're investing in through NASA and NOAA and other facilities and partnering with the world on. And the second is getting some rigor around what it actually looks like to define the mitigation measures and then underwrite against them. But then the third part really becomes about systems change and policy. And I think that's where, since this is a conversation about what in part the private sector can do, I think the private sector's got to get more aggressive about demanding the sort of reforms that facilitate accelerated capital formation and ultimately facilitate increased project development in the space. The president, through the infrastructure law, has marshaled the largest investment in resilience in the history of the United States, $50 billion. But that is hopefully just a catalytic down payment on the sort of resilience and adaptation investments we're going to make over this decade and the next to improve the safety, security, and well-being position of our communities and our people. And maybe the last thing I'll say, just as a prompt, is as we do that, as we think about valuation and we think about compliance-based strategies to get to resilience, which I think folks have to embrace. Otherwise, we will not have the scale-up that we need. Nature-based solutions has to be part of it. We know that by investing in things like wetlands restoration, we are building the sponge that will absorb the fury of the sea, and we're also building blue carbon sinks that will pull down carbon from the sky. There's no reason for that to not be something that is a bankable commodity. When we're thinking about property risk and casualty insurance, when we're thinking about companies investing in sinks. It's a very daunting thing, and that's why the White House brought together people at a summit and issued a framework, the parameters for a conversation that continues to get deeper, continues to be enriched by all of you. We're very grateful to be able to be your partners in this work. Thanks so much.
Ali, thank you so much. And wow, Turdor is on in about 8 minutes. That is super impressive. So we've got public sector and private sector finance, resilience, nature-based solutions, investment, and the role of government and the private sector. So panel members, would you like to do all of that in, 25 minutes? That would be fantastic. Would you like to join me on the stage? We have a handy guide as to where you're going to be sitting. So if you could place yourselves appropriately. And Ali, thank you so much for your time. I know it's incredibly limited. Thank you. Bye-bye. Fab. So I'm going to switch to the microphone of power now, and excellent. Yes, brilliant. Thank you very much. Now, I think the word is focused. In fact, do you know what? I'm going to use this microphone, because if that's okay, so it's a bit easier. We're very focused. I think that's the word for time poor. So I'd like you to be as concise and punchy and focused as you possibly can in your responses. And could you mind introducing yourself when I ask you your first question? That would be fantastic. So Anja, I wonder if I could ask you first, what does resilience mean to you in the context of that great introduction that we had?
Thank you so much. Okay, so good morning, everyone. I am Anza from Madagascar, and happy to be the woman on stage also. I am the president and co-founder of ICA, which is the National Youth Alliance in Madagascar, working for climate, biodiversity, and desertification. It comprises 50,000 young people in Madagascar and 50 organizations. Okay, so what resilience means to me? I think resilience is really the capacity of people, to overcome the crisis, not to live with it, but really to go beyond it and not to suffer from it. This could be for me the concise response. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Nat, so can I ask you now? You mentioned in dispatches there in that opening address. For you, what does resilience mean?
Thanks. So Nat Cohen, I'm the president of the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, or C2ES, and we work with businesses and policymakers to accelerate the transition to a thriving, just, and resilient net zero economy, and that resilience piece is part of what we're here. I think, to me, resilience is, it's distinct from adaptation, right? We often put it in the same buckets. I've learned this, I think, from Seth, right? I mean, I think about adaptation as the process of planning and adapting to the things you can plan for. We know that the sea level's rising. We know temperatures are rising. We know we're going to see more heat, so you can adapt to those things. You can change how buildings are built and so on. But resilience is having the ability to respond, the capacity to respond to the extra risks that are there, the way we're spreading out the tail risk in ways that we don't know exactly what's going to happen. And so I think you kicked us off very well, Sarah, at the beginning, sort of resilience, that capacity to respond to things that you don't know are going to happen, but then bounce back from them. So I think resilience in the climate space in particular, building in that capacity to be ready to respond to climate risk that we know is coming, but we can't predict exactly what form it will take.
Brilliant, thank you. David, again, mentioned in dispatches in terms of grid connectivity. We all know there is a queue in some countries waiting to get onto the grid for renewables. That capacity is a real issue. Do you feel that there is resilience in the system, or what does resilience mean to you in this context?
Yeah, brilliant. David Wright, Chief Engineer, Chief Risk Officer of National Grid, and it's terrific to be on such a knowledgeable panel. Sarah, I think really when I'm thinking about the connections queue and some of those challenges that we're facing in many different areas, I think quite often it's because the regulatory arrangements and processes are set up on a first-come, first-served basis. And so there's people who've reserved capacity, if you will. But if you actually look at the connection volumes of people you can connect, so it's less of a grid problem in a lot of countries, but it's more of an industry arrangements and a regulatory issue that needs to get resolved. And we're massive big advocates for connect or move rather than this sort of reserving of capacity. Going to the sort of other part of your question about what does resilience mean to me, I think, you know, we need to reflect on the fact that as citizens, as human beings, we all depend on a few certain things for life. We depend on healthcare, we depend on energy, we depend on food and water. And the threats to that infrastructure that we depend on every day is significantly changing. And that therefore means some of the engineering decisions that we've made in the past are no longer relevant for the future, which gives us two challenges, I think. One is how do you adapt your existing networks, but also how do you get the right standards, codes, policies, as Ali was saying, on everything that you're building new to make sure it's, you know, these assets will have lives of 40, 60 years. So you really need to be thinking about 2060, 2080 kind of timescales and weather conditions rather than today.
Fantastic. Seth, that intersection that was also mentioned between government and private sector, I was talking to a friend of mine who's one of the lead negotiators, and he said, do you know what, we've done all the negotiating. UNFCCC and Paris was the negotiating. We just need delivery now. How do you think that happens in this context, and what does resilience mean for you in that context?
Oh, I love that framing. What a great way to frame that. So my name is Seth Schultz. I'm the CEO of Resilience Rising. Resilience Rising is a global consortium of 6 different key communities of practice, with a mission of nothing less than mainstreaming resilience globally. And we do that through engaging deeply with youth, engineers, finance, etc. You can learn more about it on our website. But I love the framing of that question because a lot of people forget, you know, we are here with the UNFCCC at COP, and the COP mechanism was established to come up with a treaty. And to your point, that happened in 2015. I think people forget that agreement happened. And what we're supposed to be doing now is figuring out how we're going to be implementing that, not continuing to negotiate if we're going to be doing that. But to your point, you know, the burden was on the national governments of the world to figure out and come to some agreement. There's a lot of additional fine tuning and tweaking that needs to do that. But in the implementation space, it's absolutely about delivery. And I think 21st century leadership is partnership. So there must be a confluence of these key communities of practice in order to deliver that. And if we're talking about resilience demands holistic and systemic change in order to accomplish it. And to that, when you're asking, like, how do I define it? You know, we need to use your words very carefully. I don't disagree with a single panel member's definition of it. What we need to do is make sure we understand what we're talking about with whom we're talking to it about. And for that, because we represent such a massive network of organizations in this space, the kind of way we like to define that is resilience is the ability to withstand, adapt, and or to recover positively from a shock or stress, period, about anything. And that's a way that it's a very holistic way of looking at it, and it's a way that allows us to engage. Doesn't matter whether we're talking to engineers or policy leaders and or finance. That kind of terminology, I think, is really critical to make sure you have a baseline of consistency in your engagement.
Brilliant, thank you. Robert, we were talking earlier, and I mentioned that a friend of mine said recently, there is no competitive advantage if the planet's on fire. And in that context, perhaps, if I could ask you what you think of resilience means in the context of working in as many on the panel do, on a global organisation and a global scale.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So I'm Rob Kay. I'm Arup's climate sustainability lead in the Americas and also help coordinate adaptation resilience globally. And Arup is an engineering, environmental and consulting company with about 18,000 members worldwide. I'm not actually feeling very resilient today. I've got to tell you, I'm tired, and my hands hurt, my joints hurt because I have rheumatoid arthritis since I was a kid. And it's the first time I've actually said this publicly, actually, because that's a vulnerability that I personally have. And so I can say to my team members, my resilience is low, actually. And I can say that to my colleagues because we understand what that means, right? If you say my personal resilience is low, because I have vulnerabilities, but then I have capacities. Fortunately, medical, I have the privilege of having access to good medicine, and I'm also able to have access to other teammates who can help with my personal resilience. And so what the other panelists have said is that for me, resilience is that combination of the vulnerabilities that we have, individually and collectively, and then societally, and the capacities that we have to work together to actually overcome those vulnerabilities.
Oh, brilliant, thank you. And now our panelists have set out a fantastic range of thoughts and diverse opinions. Very, very happy to take comments from our audience here in Dubai. But I've got so many questions, but I would like to put another under. Please do feel free. This is a conversation, so please do feel free to chip in or respond as you'd like. Anja, I'd like to, if I may, come to you, because there's been a theme running through of young people. I know many of us have been completely inspired by the amazing young people, including yourself, that we've met, who are absolutely changing the whole conversation around this. Really, yes, absolutely. I would clap, 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 clap. There's a kind of emoji clap there.
Thank you, Sarah.
But do you feel optimistic? Do you feel hopeful? What do you think the older people in the room should do to support you?
Okay, I think as a young people and as a lady too, I think I represent the majority of the population, especially in African countries and in developing countries. For example, in Madagascar, we are 70% less than 35 years old and women. So what can you do here to support us? The first thing would be to give trust. Because we might do great things, but if we do not have the trust to do better and to have the space to speak and to act, we would just stay in our home and be like the vulnerable ones that the world wants us to be. So I think trust first. The second is to give also the space to speak. As high as our voice rises, as high as we could have the place, then we can contribute to change the world and also to create a world where it's livable for women like me, for young people like me, and from communities from Madagascar, which is a very poor country like my community. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Nat, I wonder if I could ask you that point about trust. It's really difficult to get money from VC funders if you're of colour, if you're a woman, if you're from a global majority country. It's really difficult to get the collaboration and cooperation in any other than a most transactional way if you're from those global majority communities. How do we change that to make the world a better place?
Well, if I knew the answer to that, I probably wouldn't be sitting here on this panel. I would be out, solving the world's problems. I mean, I guess I may, if I may, because that's a huge question. I thought maybe I could respond a little bit differently to what Anja said, because I thought that was really beautiful what you said, but as somebody who just is on the other side of 50, and I hate to admit that. I was thinking, well, what would I ask of young people? I mean, I've got two daughters, both in college. And I think one of them is the trust on the other piece. Like, trust trust that that those of us who have been at it for a long time, even though we're not solving it at the pace, that we're also, give that trust to us too. I think that's a wonderful thing to think about, with trust in both trust that we're also trying, even if we haven't been doing a great job. And the other is the sort of the grace of patience, not that you should be patient about the pace of change, but patient that we may take a little bit of time. Those of us who have been around the COPs, for whom this is a 12th COP or a 15th COP or a 25th COP, sometimes need a little bit of time to catch up, but we will, to what you all are doing. But I loved your answer, and the space, the trust in the space, and I think that's well said.
Seth, you work very much in this space, trying to increase understanding and awareness. What would your advice be to Anja when she's trying to get that trust and trying to get that profile for these incredibly important causes?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that is the essential question, and I think it's difficult to get anybody's trust right now. There's a level of mistrust going around, whether it's politics or gender, etc. So I think that level of sincerity and trust needs to be thought about more deeply, and I think one of the root causes of that is I think we're very near being the case as a species, as human. We failed to at the art of listening. This is a basic thing, and I'm particularly reminded about that at COP. It's just one session after another where people are just talking. But the bigger part of COP is listening and trying to do that as much as you can and with as much humility as you can, because the main thing is to remember is that we're all calling for this transformation, but whether we want it or not, transformation is happening. And our job is to ensure that we are protecting both people and the planet to the best of our ability as quickly as we can, so that the haves and the have-nots don't get further exacerbated and we don't continue to do more impact and damage in the case that we already have. So I think that starts, one, with a lot of listening, two, a lot of humility, because one of my favorite lines is there's an American futurist, Alvin Toffler, and he had this phenomenal quote, and it said, the illiterate of the 21st century aren't going to be those that can't read and write. It's going to be those that can't learn, unlearn, and relearn. And we all have to remember that, regardless of your age. And I think it's a profound thing that if we're not individually coming to this with trust and listening and the ability to learn and unlearn at a rapid pace, we aren't going to be able to achieve what we need to.
Brilliant, thank you. Rob and David, I'd like to ask you the trust question first, but both as well, but in a slightly different way. Rob, if I could come to you first. You work across many different sectors with many different organisations and companies. How do you get them to trust each other for a solution that benefits everyone, and where you might have to give a bit and take a bit?
Yeah, that's good. It's a good question. The way that the greenhouse gas world has evolved with its language, and I absolutely agree with you, Seth, that words are really important in this space. And the scope 1, 2, 3 discussion, of course, is maturing to the point where it's now understood, I think. And the way that I view that world is that the scope 1 is like a big rock that's thrown into a pond. And there are all these individual organizations with their 1 and 2 rocks throwing them in. And then there are these scope 3 ripples that are coming out, and they're all interacting with each other, and it looks chaotic. I think what we've been doing a lot in the resilience space is actually just looking at the chaos and actually saying, oh, look, that's too chaotic. There are all these organizations interacting with each other. There's all these organizations. There's a public sector, private sector community. There's systemic disadvantage. There's racism. There's gender inequity. There's all of these issues are all combined into what appears to be an incredibly chaotic view of actually building resilience. And I think what's starting to emerge very quickly, and I would really want to accelerate this, particularly as the disclosure regime starts to kick in around climate resilience. And this is all, again, being in the US in particular. There's some really interesting things happening in California around climate risk disclosure. Again, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the whole TCFD world is starting to increase the visibility from a corporate space. And And those advanced organizations that understand their own climate resilience, National Grid being one of them, are really starting to now in their resilience journey, and I use that term specifically because of the leadership of Resilience Rising on thinking of journeys, at the point where it's like, okay, I understand myself, I understand my own organization, and then to move forward, I need to work with my partners. For example, and perhaps using an energy example if I could, you have an electricity substation that's very close, that's below sea level. And the organization figures that out, says that's vulnerable. What are we going to do about that? Well, there are options there, including having to work with community members, local businesses, who's going to fund that, as Ali said before, and that requires an understanding for all of those organizations, the community members centrally to that, because 9 times out of 10, that will be a very vulnerable place and has systemic vulnerability in there and inequities. Again, 9 times out of 10. And it's that working together through shared solutioning, I think, that builds trust. Because at the moment, I feel that there is a real risk of resilience inequity, of those that are starting to understand themselves and wanting to reach out and partner through trust. And I think there is an appetite for that, actually, moving forward.
Brilliant. David, same question. I mean, the whole thing about trust, particularly as you're providing, enabling others to go on a sometimes very rapid renewable journey, how does trust fit into your working environment?
I think this sort of concept of trust is fantastic. And for me, trust is earned. And so it starts actually with taking action. And I think, when we think about all of these systems and these interconnection of all the different sectors that are now coming together with the energy transition, I think what you need is you've got millions of assets out there. How do you decide where to start? How do you decide what to do, where to invest your money? And we all know that in the concept of resilience, making an investment today to put more flood defences around a substation or whatever pays back 4 to 6 times when you actually look at the cost once the event has occurred. But you need to make the investment today for tomorrow. And quite often our approaches, frameworks, the way money is approved and made available isn't appropriately valuing that. So what really needs to happen and what we're doing around this and really earning that trust is working with people like Seth and others on the panel. Because it starts with collaboration. You need utilities like us to systematically, I'm an engineer, right? You need to systematically assess, based on the latest climate science, different scenarios, what the impact on all of those millions of assets that you've got out there are going to be. So you can identify the vulnerabilities and then work out what is the cheapest solution in order to address that. And that's what we've been doing. We've been building modelling capability. We've been working with many others across the whole industry and sector to learn, to listen, to be humble, but then to do the hard work, if you will, of working out what you need to do. And then you need the kind of collaboration coming back around where once you've worked out that, it then comes to, well, how do we get these investments made? In actual fact, the cheapest investment is every time you're replacing an asset to replacing it with a more resilient, because the incremental cost is really, really low. So it needs a long-term view and developing those codes, those standards, those approaches to make those investments. But it all starts with action.
That brilliant answer. Thank you very much. And Nat, I wonder if I could pick up on that with you, the work that you do cross-sectorally. We've heard from other speakers about this. What have you learned? What do you think works? What approaches works when it comes to genuinely successful collaboration?
Sure. So I'll describe the work very briefly and then highlight 3 things, but also tee some other things up because I know others, including Seth, whom we're working very closely with, will pick up on the themes. So I mentioned C2S works with businesses and policymakers to accelerate that transition to a thriving, just and resilient economy. And on the resilience piece, we've really been doing a couple of things. One is to convene our companies along with other companies and stakeholders around in local communities. We've started out in the Colorado North Range, the North Range of Colorado, and really understanding what the opportunities are and the best practices are to respond to local, regional resilience, climate change impacts, and building resilience for them. In that case, heat and wildfire, and pulling those stakeholders together has really taught us a lot. The second piece that I'll just mention is working with our companies to understand at a first pass what are the best practices, what are emerging practices. We published an emerging blueprint on corporate resilience last year, really learning from our companies how they are engaging in resilience and what they see as the priorities. And so I'll just pull out sort of a couple of high-level lessons. One is there are just so many interdependencies here, right? And so, an example of that is in terms of what we hear from our companies about communities. And David and Seth have heard me say this, but it actually was from a conversation we had with National Grid that really stuck with me, that we had back in the autumn, which was, we often think about resilience from a corporate perspective as building building resilience to physical impacts in your physical plant. It's elevating the substation so that it doesn't flood when the sea level rises or when you get storm surges. It's sort of hardening your physical facilities. All of that is important, of course. And that can be nature-based in terms of building resilience. But what we hear again and again is that it's also about the resilience of the communities that the companies are in. Whether that's Bank of America, which operates in every community in the United States, and they need to think about who are their customers as well as their workers and the resilience of those communities, or whether it's, again, National Grid saying it doesn't help much to keep the lights on if there's nobody, if we don't have a resilient community that's drawing that power and that's in our supply chain. So that's one, is that interdependencies in the community. And that's really good for organizations that care not only about the corporation and the health, but also about the public goods. There's a real connection there. The second point I would make is it links up on what Ali said. What's the role for policy? I think we're just beginning to sort of really scratch the surface on this. We've done so much work, we and others, on mitigation policy, cutting emissions, and so on. But how do we think about resilience? I really liked what Ali said about valuation. I'm an economist, so of course I'm going to like that. But we think a lot in the mitigation side about, well, boy, it would be great if we put a price on carbon. If we can't do that, how about subsidies, or let's change the relative prices? But I think Ali made a really important point about if we don't value resilience and figure out how to put that valuation on resilience, it's going to be underinvested in. So how do we do that, and what kind of policies can we put in place? I think that's a white space we need to work on. The last one, I'll be very quick because I know Seth will touch more on it, but we hear from the companies we talk to, and we've been working with Resilience Rising on this. There's another white space out there, which is what's the framework and the guidance for what good looks like in corporate practice on resilience. We've had 25 years of practice in the mitigation side, this climate disclosure. I mean, obviously there are overlaps, but disclosing emissions, setting targets, engaging, all the things that SBTI and CDP and GHG protocol have been doing. We don't have much at all of that on the resilience side. And so that's something we found there's a real need to fill, and we're hoping to fill it.
Even that resilience means something slightly different to lots of different people. I used to work in the water industry, and we had lots of conversations with the UK government about what resilience meant. I think sometimes they thought we had a secret reservoir kind of somewhere that we could just turn the taps on when it all went a bit AWOL. But, that actually, just UK government, that isn't the case, just so for the next time. But Seth, I wonder if I could ask you to that point about cross-sector, and I'd like to come to Anja in a minute to talk about nature-based solutions and start that conversation, because I think, to your point, that's really important. Seth, working collaboratively, cross-sectorally, and actually just speaking the same language here, how do you manage that?
Well, I mean, it just takes a lot of work, a lot of patience. I was talking about this on another panel. There's two forms of collaboration. There's the little C collaboration, which everybody says they do. And then there's a big C collaboration, which is slow and painful and includes a lot of compromise. And I think everybody says they do collaboration, but they don't really do it. And that becomes even more difficult when you've got multiple sectors or multiple viewpoints on an issue. So I'm very proud of the work that we're doing with C2ES right now in gathering a bunch of companies from a diverse range of sectors to try to come together and create a framework and a platform of commonality and understanding. It's essential. But it also has to be met. They're not going to do it just because we're telling them they should. They're also doing it because I think we're at a point in history and this evolution of our society that is demanding it. And that's what's exciting to me, is that I think companies are getting this in a totally different way now, and the appetite is tremendous. I was engaging, so I've done a lot of work in the city space, and one of the reasons I think I did so much work on climate in cities for a long time is that cities are one of the very few kind of organizational constructs that allow a deep level of collaboration. They're very physically placed, right? So a city here, they do compete with talent and investment and people, but they do it in different places. And if one city is interested in learning from another, they kind of roll the red carpet out. For a long time, companies do not do that. A good friend, the former mayor of Atlanta, had this fabulous analogy. I think Nat's heard me give it before, but the two CEOs bump into each other. One's the CEO of Pepsi, one's the CEO of Coke in an airport, and they have the chat. And the CEO of Coke is talking to the CEO of Pepsi. You remember that Crystal Pepsi you had back in the early 90s? I loved Crystal Pepsi. What happened? He goes, we didn't do well. We stopped making it. The CEO of Coke is like, well, great. I loved it. It was one of my favorite drinks as a kid. Can I have the recipe? And the guy just laughed. Are you crazy? No, I'm not going to give that to you. But if the mayor of Edmonton goes and visits the mayor of Pittsburgh and is blown away by his light rail transit system and says, how'd you do that? You come on down. I'll show you how we did it. Here's our procurement. Here's the consultant we used. This is how much it cost. See if it works. Like, companies haven't done that, but they are now. They are beginning to do that now. And I think at the heart of what we're trying to do is figure out the right congregation of those companies to come together to solve a common challenge. And again, it's not a simple thing. It's not an easy thing. But I think at the heart of this, I think there's three broad things, right? We are people and need to remember the people part of companies' infrastructure, right? So it's people first. Second, if we take care of our people, we can have a thriving democracy, the governance. And if we have a thriving democracy that's doing the right thing and taking care of people, the job of that is to take care of the planet. And companies need all three of those things to operate. They need people. They need governance structures and countries with which they can have continuous operations and businesses, and they need the environment. And if we start grounding it in those three things, all of a sudden it's a very rich tapestry engagement, and it gets much less chippy about what am I doing, what are you doing, what's your market share, who am I trying to... And this stuff drops away. I'm struck by the engineering community, right? So everybody talks about shifting trillions of dollars and all the infrastructure we need, right? Everybody forgets, if you had all the policy, all the technology, and all the money, we don't have enough capacity to do it. There literally isn't enough engineers in the world. Why are engineers competing with each other? They need to grow 3 times in order to deliver this stuff. Engineers need to start thinking like the medical field, where doctors are doing stuff remotely, and there's telehealth. You need to radically change these things. There's more than enough work to go around. Let's collaborate and get on with the job instead of competing. And I think, I don't know if others would disagree, but we're seeing some serious movement now in that direction, which is very exciting.
I'm really glad you mentioned environment in that, because, of course, another thing that Ali said was nature-based solutions and how we value what is intrinsically priceless. If you're thinking about, and Nanja, I'd love to ask your thoughts on this. You have an incredible, unique, diverse ecosystem, which is fragile and needs to be protected. How do we help you value that and make sure that there is value, that others place value on that, so it can be maintained and also thrive as well?
Yes, thank you, Sarah. I think that's something which needs to be said, because Madagascar is, a very beautiful country. And let me give you 2 main facts when we talk about Madagascar. The first thing, 80% of our biodiversity is endemic. And no, Madagascar is not the movie. We do not have lion, we do not have zebra, we do not have hippo. That's not Madagascar. But Madagascar, it's beautiful beaches, it's beautiful forests, and 80% endemicity of its biodiversity. But unfortunately, also, in another hand, we are losing 100,000 hectares of forest each year, and now only 10% of the forest is remaining. And as you said, it is very fragile, because if we reach the 2-degree increase, then 80% of the biodiversity will be extinct. So that's crazy, and that will be apocalypse for Madagascar. I would say there is still hope. Why there is hope? Because the community is starting to realize that they depend on this ecosystem, that they depend on these natural resources, but it's not also easy for them. Why? Because another 80% of the population is living under the threshold of poverty, because they are earning less than $1 a day. And you can imagine it's not livable. That's why they are rushing into the forests. That's why they are rushing into natural resources. That's why, because their belly are empty, they do not think about, the lemurs or the chameleon. It's not their priority. So I think there is hope. Why? Because many actors are supporting those communities, to transitioning into sustainable practices, into income generating activities that are not, I would say, that doesn't contribute to destroy the ecosystem. And this is nature-based solution, actually, which is well promoted in Madagascar. But this is not sufficient yet, because Seth talked about the policy, and in Madagascar, the policy, the government, and the frames are not really relevant related to the context. Why? Because it's copied from French policies, because we've been colonized by French. So I would say for Madagascar and for many African countries, fight against climate change, biodiversity conservation will come with the real decolonization. And also, it will come with the support and, again, the trust to the actors which are really on the grassroots. And now, last thing, when we talk about basic needs, it's a catastrophe. Why? Because 1 out of 2 kids doesn't go to school in Madagascar. 1 out of 2 women doesn't go to the primary health care when they give birth. And this has to do with climate change, but this also has to do with how the country is coping and trying to adapt their frames and their policy to the real context on the base. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Rob, that idea of helping to value and protect things that are, as I just very powerfully said, invaluable. How do you do that in a corporate context?
At Arup, we think of the 3 intersecting crises that we're trying to address all at the same time. We're looking at the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis, and the crisis of inequity. And so the way that we do all of our work and the work that we do with our clients is actually through that lens, actually on the daily. That's pretty much everything that we do. And I think one of the opportunities, I think, in the US context, perhaps going back to Ali, and again, thinking of your comments too, moving forward, is actually looking at the total value, which sounds jargonistic, but in a developing country context, that actually the mental health benefits of very small areas of park, recreational spaces and so on, shading benefits against extreme heat and so on. There is a sense that by looking at biodiversity issues, you have to look at like a massive ecosystem scale. Now, of course, you have to do that. Of course. But in addition to that, you can also think about piecing together really small biodiversity benefits across an urban scale. And Seth, you talked about that as well. And increasingly by using technology solutions, that you can actually look at the benefits of all of those things together, at large ecosystem restoration, small, very real microsystem restoration as well, and be able to really address the fact that through stormwater benefits, mental health benefits, recreational benefits, and so on, they actually all add up to really significant economic opportunities for communities.
Thank you, David. Nature-based solutions. We don't often talk about it in the context of energy, particularly. But do you see this as a possible, either a possible way of revenue generation or a possible way of even energy or other benefit generation?
I don't think we see it in that context, but we absolutely recognise that our whole purpose in life is to serve communities. You know, that's what your role is, and that's what drives me every day to be solving some of these complex problems. And I think you've got to sort of really centre yourself on that. So, Rob shared some personal vulnerabilities about his personal resilience. And in GRID, one of our sort of big beliefs, if you will, is really about supporting employees and really caring for the employees' personal resilience, but also how do you actually unlock that human potential so that the individuals who are then working in your organisation to better the life of the communities that we're serving are really, really engaged, if you will, in what they're trying to do. I think in the context of nature-based solutions as well, when I think about my own personal resilience, I don't know about you, but I just love getting back to nature. I love going and visiting national parks or going to beautiful countries like Madagascar. And when you do that, it just fills you with a sense of energy. And so I think that is a way we need to be thinking about it. We don't need to be building concrete walls to protect our substations from flooding. If there's nature-based solutions that you can put natural barriers in place to solve some of these issues. So we're really big believers in recognising the resilience and our purpose starts with the communities that we're serving, and then looking for those solutions and making those investments to some of these complex problems that's really going to benefit society.
Thank you, Nat. As the economist, I have left you for a little bit of a sum up on this section. It's a real challenge, isn't it, that it's difficult in a financial setting to value something that we find difficult to value, but the value that we get from the natural environment is infinite, potentially. How with your economist hat on and with your business-to-business hat on, how do we get through that? And are there methods that you've seen that you think are getting close to that?
It's a great question, and one I'll be quick on, but I can't resist saying in a previous life I was an academic and wrote a primer on environmental and natural resource economics, and actually we use this example of the sort of infinite resources. So it's true both that if you think globally, right, the value of ecosystem services globally. So the example you give, sometimes you'll see, the value of ecosystem services globally is, and I'll pick a number, $34 trillion. And that's, bigger, that's twice, that's actually a vast underestimate, right? Because if you think globally about the value of all ecosystem services, it is infinite. But if you think about particular areas, which is where decision-making happens, you can actually value those, right? We have good techniques to understand both the human, the sort of the values that David was describing. Like we can understand the value that people put on natural systems for their own personal views. We can also measure the value that it serves as infrastructure. So you can value nature in this context. You can value nature-based systems for resilience. I think the problem from an economics point of view is not coming up with that measurement. It's making sure that it gets applied, because in the absence of a regulatory framework or a policy framework, there's not a natural system evaluating that, right? The market system we have is extremely good at allocating resources, but only if the price signals are there. But that's a great role for government and a great role for policy. It's also a great role for companies that understand it. They can, and so helping companies understand the value that it will bring to them. Sometimes it makes sense. Often it might make sense entirely within a company's accounting, right? But we we know that generally, because there are such broader social benefits beyond just what just what accrue to National Grid, and there aren't. Not every company is thinking about that in the societal way. We know that we're going to be underinvesting it, and so we do need some of those political policy signals, and that partly goes back to what Ali said. And there are lots of efforts underway, but that's where to sum up, the measurement is not the problem. We know how to measure it in many cases. The issue is incorporating those metrics through price signals or other policy signals, and that requires often some form of public policy.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, thank you. I was just about to say our time is almost up. So what I'll do, it's quite easy to get overwhelmed and quite downbeat when you hear some of the scales, some of the problems. What I'd like to do is ask our panellists just briefly to give us a concrete example of something that's given you real hope or optimism at COP so far. And David, can I start with you?
I mean, the first thing I'd say is what I see is people starting to really take action. And what I love that's different about this COP is we started the COP with a lot of the commitments. We want to triple renewables by 2030. We want to double energy efficiency. Getting the commitments out there early, I think, has changed the subject and the conversations going on, because they're much more action-based. Or, what needs to happen? How are we going to do it? Who are we going to collaborate with to make it happen? So that's my key takeaway that's really been different this COP.
Brilliant, thank you. Seth?
Similar. I mean, I think like many, there's a tremendous number of people at this COP who are, they're estimating 95,000 people now. Goes without saying that a number of those are probably here for the first time. This is my 12th. And in one way, this is kind of overwhelming, and it seems like a zoo. On the other hand, it's incredibly exciting to see that level of momentum and that level of interest. And I think that speaks probably positively for things to come. And then, lastly, we've been up here talking about all the things that we're doing and why, but, I personally failed to mention, the leadership of the companies themselves. We have two of them right here. You heard Rob talk about how Arup is literally restructuring their organization around those three priorities. I have the good fortune to have a front row seat to what they're doing, and it's remarkable. The same thing with National Grid. National Grid has been one of the leaders in Resilience First, which is our business network at Resilience Rising. They've been leading this for 5 years. I vividly remember conversations with them. They were talking about being a canary in the coal mine vis-a-vis resilience. And we are here, organizations like Nat and myself, to be in service of them. We're surrounding ourselves by these companies who are actually day in and day out working on tackling these issues.
Brilliant, thank you. It's my 15th. I feel I should have like a girl guiding badge to say 15 COPs. It's a bit like dog years, isn't it? Anja, your message of hope from the COP.
Okay, yeah, this COP is hope for me. Why? Because I think at the speed that we deliver decisions, it gives me hope. On the first day, we had the LNT fund agreed, and also we have $1 trillion USD on loss and damage, so that brings me hope. Also, there as an activist, also I see that people are listening here, because there are advocacy that we've done 1 or 2 years ago that brings fruit this year. So I feel optimistic for this COP. However, the battle is not over. That's why we're still here, right? So I think the last key takeout for me would be really to try to advance the multi-actor partnership in Madagascar. It means the collaboration between private sector and philanthropy and civil society, because I think that's the only way for us in Madagascar to advance the way we deliver also actions on the ground. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Nat?
I will mention two things, but I'll be very quick with both, and it's going to echo what Seth said. The first is I do think the leadership, so speaking as an economist, I said, well, we have to price things and value things, and that's a role for government. But I've been always struck and continually struck by the willingness of many leading companies to just get ahead of that, right? And just to say, well, we're going to make the investments in resilience in our communities, not only in our own infrastructure, or we're going to take I was just in a conversation about private sector action to reduce emissions, and we're just going to take the action. We're going to buy the sustainable jet fuel, even if it's much more expensive. We're going to buy this. So that really, I'm still a firm believer in the need for policy frameworks, but seeing how people are getting ahead of that is hopeful. And then the other piece I'll just mention, echo again, Seth. I think there's strength in numbers, right? There's power in numbers. And on the one hand, you say, oh my God, 95,000 people, that's crazy. Is it really, all right, everyone, is it worth all the travel and so on? And that's a valid question. But on the other hand, what that is a testament to, we're only going to solve this issue, or at least get a handle on solving climate, if we engage everybody, right? Carbon is throughout the economy. Climate change impacts everybody. So we need to be mainstreaming it into every decision and every conversation. It can't be this climate thing off to the side, and then we're going to talk about economics and society and politics over here. And so I think that's what I take, is that power in numbers. If there are 95,000 people here, that's 95,000 people who are trying to solve the problem, and they're just a tip of the larger iceberg.
Brilliant, thanks, Rob.
Yeah, all of the above. That was really articulate. For me, the transition is a transition of decarbonisation of ... or resilience of ... to decarbonisation and resilience for. So for our communities, for our partners, for our businesses, for our ... And for me, that was the real epiphany that I've had here. Because when you join those up, you join all of those fours up, you end up with a real powerful change, I think. And that's what I'm going to take away from this COP.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. What amazing. I feel like I've done a mini degree. What an amazing panel. What an amazing keynote speaker, and what an amazing audience. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.